Bonjour and welcome to the Red Lake Nation College Gikendaasowin podcast. Join us each week for discussion on topics including culture and language, career exploration, RLNC student spotlights, student projects, and other RLNC services. This week, we have our final student podcast project relating to food sovereignty that was created in Dr. Wendy Greenberg's Spring 22 Environmental Science class. This week, RLNC student Anna Lyseng interviews RLNC Athletic Director and Adjunct Instructor Dr. Dan Ninham. Red Lake Nation College would like to thank the National Endowment for the Humanities for their generous support in the creation of this podcast.
Hello, my name is Anna Lyseng, and today I have the privilege of sitting down with Dr. Dan Ninham to ask him a few questions on food sovereignty. I guess my first question would be, what do you think are the biggest food-related issues in Red Lake?
I want to share some background. I'm Oneida. I'm Oneida from Oneida, Wisconsin, and I've been around Red Lake for Susan, who is Red Lake member, and I've been married going on 40 years, so I've been around a long time around Red Lake, and in the last 30 years, more so around Red Lake, living in Bemidji. Except for the last 9 years, we've been right on site, living in Red Lake, in the community. And I've been interested in the food sovereignty movement, so to speak, and in a doctor mode often, because I look for research. I find out what I want to know, I find out about it, and I look for resources. I look at the Indigenous Food Systems Network for one online, and it addresses food sovereignty as achieving the end goal of long-term food security. I want to also share, as you may know, I'm in my third term teaching at Red Lake Nation College after retiring as a career middle school physical education teacher 2 years ago. And I teach the 1300 course Anishinaabe Nutrition and Fitness. So I think about what I can provide to my students in relation to Anishinaabe nutrition by way of an Oneida guy. I think of using other ways, other means of knowledge outside and within the Red Lake community. And a lot of that plays into where I encourage my students at Red Lake Nation College to become more aware of what's happening with the food system and the food security and with the Indigenous food system. I encourage a more Indigenous diet, and that could be daily, weekly, but it should be more indigenized with what's available locally. And what's available locally, and making a connection. As the Indigenous Food Systems Network talks about, that food is a gift from the Creator. And on the sidebar with the Indigenous Games, that's the way that I'm taught as well, which I express that knowledge is that the Indigenous Games are a gift from the Creator. So you extend that to food. Food is sacred. And Indigenous food is encouraged to be eaten, and even prior to that to be prepared, and even prior to that to know what is available, and directly to the question about our community. And even though I'm Oneida, I still consider Red Lake to be a part of for me to be a part of the community, because I live here in Red Lake, and I'm married to a Red Lake band member, and our kids are Red Lake, and our grandkids are Red Lake band members. But it goes back to me also being Oneida, and looking at what our needs in the community are to gain that Indigenous knowledge, the knowledge, the ways of knowing, the ways of being, and the ways of doing all connect to our end result of food security. So I think sharing that knowledge and finding that knowledge is so important, and even going beyond the college level. And there's so many outstanding programs that are happening at this time. At the Four Directions, I think of their program, and with gardening, and with they had a recent Zoom session, I believe, with I'm not sure how many different sessions, but to provide that on YouTube, and to provide that at no cost. The only cost of a lot of this finding knowledge is the time to find more knowledge in whatever we need for our community. And the information is out there. I think of gardening time is coming, and I think there's programs that will provide seeds and community plots, and I know that's been going on for a number of years, but we encourage that as well. So I'm not sure if that answered the question.
Definitely. Which leads me to my next question. What do you think we could do to get the youth more involved? Do you think enough is done in schools? Do you think more could be done?
I can't answer for what's happening in the schools. I could, one of my philosophies and my practice is that I only say what I know. And so I'm not sure what's happening in the schools. I know what's happening with me. I have an extension from the Red Lake Nation College Anishinaabe Nutrition course. I have gone to regional schools in Minnesota primarily, and have provided Indigenous food training with the students. I was at Northland High School yesterday and bringing in Indigenous food, talking about the Indigenous food, and encouraging the students all the way from using appropriate cutting of vegetable techniques to talking about the Indian Health Service initiative, My Native Plate, which is using a smaller plate, and the height of your food should only be about 1.25 inches, and you partition your plate into the 4 food groups. And I extend the thinking to, they talk about using wheat bread on a hamburger, but I'd encourage a bison burger, and we know that it costs more, but in the long run, and which coincides with food sovereignty, with the food supply, and that thinking that it's better for us and to find a way. So we need to find ways to add Indigenous food in our diet. You look locally, You talk to people. You use your foraging skills to go look out into the woods and the fields for the right food supply that's available. You in our hunting practices that we use all of the animal, and not only just the meat, but there's other parts of the animal, and teach the cultural lessons thereof of using the whole animal. But I talk about that when I'm with the students, and we usually do some of the recipes that we do in our course. I do outside, like at Northland High School, we had the wild rice and the ground bison and stuffed bell peppers, put some shredded carrots on it and baked it. Showed them how to do that, encouraging them to do that at home for their families. We also did what's called a Potawatomi rice, which is the wild rice, and we add ground bison and dried cranberries and blueberries, and add maple syrup to it. It's making me hungry.
Definitely.
So, and then the students, they prepare that, they cook it, and they eat it, and they clean up after. So you think of all the different roles that they have to fulfill. That's family roles, gender roles, and that everyone takes care of each other, and it's really it's powerful what you can do in just 40 minutes of a class. And it doesn't matter if it's the adults class and the college level, or going to a high school. I even have a school that wants me to come in and do a Indigenous food session with early childhood. So again, you only do what you know, and I'm going to find out how to do that. And it's going to happen, but I'm going to have to do some research on how to do that. So the Indigenous food programming, I go around the different schools and communities and do that, as well as the Indigenous games. And they're, as I mentioned, they're both sacred. They're both given to us by the Creator. And that's the mentality that I have, that it's food is a gift from the Creator. And looking at that website, it talks about our responsibility. And I'll read it. It's right here. The Indigenous food sovereignty is fundamentally achieved by upholding our sacred responsibility to nurture healthy, interdependent relationships with the land, plants, and animals that provide us with our food. I mean, that's something you could take a screenshot and put that up on your refrigerator or next to your office, and live by that, believe in it. And I go back to being Oneida. I think one of our core values is Ganigulio, Oneida language, is that it's the good mind and the good heart and the good spirit. And to make that connection, with Indigenous food, that we have to provide and take care of our communities and the circle of our communities and our families and ourselves within that circle. So toward the question of what can we do with the youth, I think the youth, well, I know the youth are a part of that interdependent relationships, as this comment talks about the interrelationship. So they're part of all of us, and we need to think of that 7th generation of our future. And the way it's taught to me is that we're in our 7th generation from 7 generations ago. And we could be in our 6th generation, or wherever we are, or we could start our next 7 generations. But it's evolving, it continues to evolve, that whatever we do, it affects our future. So that knowledge has to be shared, and every day with all of our elders and our youth.
Well, thank you so much. I think you've answered everything and more. I want to thank you for taking the time and meeting with me and sharing your knowledge. It means a great deal.
We're always learning. We're always learning.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. The Gikendaasowin podcast will be taking a break next week, but be sure to join us again in 2 weeks for our next episode. A miigwech to the following for their efforts in the creation of this Red Lake Nation College Gikendaasowin podcast episode. Opening and closing music by Director of Equity, Cultural Education and Archives, Floyd Buck-Jourdain. Opening introduction, closing preview, and production by NEH intern Rebecca Peterson. Our host this week, RLNC student Anna Lyseng. Our guest speaker this week, RLNC Athletic Director and Adjunct Instructor Dr. Dan Ninham. And the National Endowment for the Humanities for their generous support. Miigwech.